Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Fidel Sans was at home. It was a rarity lately. He was in the bedroom, talking on the phone with someone. His voice was loud, energetic, and businesslike. Was someone from work bothering him? Damn it! When Rafaela and Fidel first got married, he worked as a master craftsman at a company that installed plastic windows. The salary, of course, wasn't impressive, but it wasn't exactly destitute either. They could live decently on that money if they avoided extravagance. Rafaela also earned pennies at her telecenter. Honestly, their parents helped them out at first. But they had to act as if it were done discreetly, not directly. Fidel was very embarrassed by the fact that Rafaela's parents were supporting the young family. Rafaela supposedly received a bonus. It was money in an envelope from her father, or an unexpected long-standing debt was repaid to her. Well, they always had to come up with something. It didn't bother Rafaela at all. She wanted her beloved to feel calm and comfortable with her, not constantly worrying about whether his wife and her parents were supporting him. Rafaela always believed in her husband and knew he would definitely succeed. He was kind, determined, hardworking, and smart. Even after 3 years of marriage, she still thought her husband was the best person in the world. And now he was there, in the other room, discussing something. With whom? Probably with colleagues. For the first time in a month, he had a day off, but he couldn't stop talking about work. Or was it one of his friends after all? Because his tone was so unofficial, and he was clearly smiling. What were they talking about? Rafaela became curious. She got up from her chair, approached the bedroom, and stood behind the half-open door, listening. Rafaela was, as some said, born with a silver spoon in her mouth. This meant she was born into a wealthy family. However, her parents, Ernesto and Olivia Ortiz, couldn't always boast financial stability, quite the opposite. At the time they met, both were typical poor students at the local medical academy. Ernesto came from a village and, therefore, lived in a dormitory. Olivia was raised by her mother, who worked at the local library. Understandably, her mother's salary wasn't enough to support 2 adults, so Olivia, when she was a student, worked in the evenings as a cleaning lady. Olivia and Ernesto shared many things: humble origins, views on life, and a love for their future profession. Somehow, they were immediately drawn to each other, as if they had recognized their soulmate at first sight. Ernesto, as tradition dictated, took the first step. He gathered courage, asked the cute classmate out on a date, and thus their romance began. However, the lovers had to carve out time for meetings. Both were studying and working, and their schedules were very tight. After graduating from university, the couple got married. By that time, they had already decided on their specialties and found jobs in their fields. Olivia chose pediatrics and now worked at a children's clinic. Ernesto, on the other hand, joined the pediatric surgery center as an orthopedic surgeon. The salaries were small, but the workload was immense. It was a tough time: cramped living conditions, cutting back on everything possible, sleepless nights. But Olivia and Ernesto always supported and encouraged each other. The parents of the newlyweds kept hinting that they wanted grandchildren. It was the age-old stereotype that the next step after marriage was to have heirs. But the spouses were adamant about this matter. First, they needed to establish their careers, get on their feet, and then think about children, because a child couldn't live in such conditions, their parents working day and night, not having enough money for anything. The newlyweds didn't want that. Then somehow, the family's financial situation improved. Ernesto got a job at a private clinic, where the salaries were significantly higher. Soon, his wife started working there as well. The young couple even bought their own apartment. They got a mortgage, of course, but the payments were manageable for them. Now Olivia and Ernesto lived better, traveled, dined out in cafes and restaurants, and indulged themselves in nice things like extra new dresses or trendy gadgets. It was around then, closer to their 40s, that they started thinking about having children. However, they found out it wasn't so simple. Olivia had health issues that hindered conception and pregnancy. The spouses didn't lose hope, both being in the medical field. They had plenty of acquaintances and connections. Thus, a prolonged treatment process began. Olivia diligently followed all the doctor's recommendations, took pills on schedule, administered herself vitamin injections, followed a special diet, and regularly underwent all necessary tests. It seemed that with such a serious approach, success was inevitable, but there were no results, not even with IVF. Ernesto discouraged his wife from the complex procedure, knowing it was a significant strain on the body. Olivia so desperately wanted a child, but all was in vain. Every attempt ended in disappointment. Olivia fell into a state of apathy. She had everything she needed for happiness: a loving, caring, successful husband, an interesting job, and professional recognition. Moreover, she had many material things: a new apartment, a beautiful car, and a wardrobe full of clothes and shoes. But she envied a young girl from the neighboring building who was giving birth to healthy children one after another. She already had 3 of them. This young mother walked around in old, cheap clothes, but didn't look happy at all. She was rather tired. Of course, she had no idea that a wealthy, successful woman, driving up to the building in the evenings in a beautiful car, was watching her and experiencing such strange feelings. To distract his wife from her heavy thoughts and shift her focus, Ernesto came up with the idea of starting their own business and opening their own clinic. Olivia responded to the unexpected idea with enthusiasm. It seemed interesting to her, and she really wanted to distract herself. The spouses had the initial capital, having managed to save up the necessary amount during their time working at the private medical center. Both understood that they would likely just lose this money, but they decided to take the risk. After all, they were risking their savings by not taking out a loan, so they wouldn't go into debt. The adventurous project unexpectedly turned out to be successful. At first, they operated as a small office, then they rented a whole apartment for the clinic. Soon, they had to find a separate, spacious location. That's how their pediatric clinic appeared. At first, they worked for the idea, and then it was time to reap the rewards. The clinic started bringing in income, and quite a significant one. Now the spouses fully felt what it was like to be truly wealthy people. Olivia was overjoyed. She practically blossomed with the opening of the clinic. Ernesto, watching his happy wife, smiled. It was all worth it. Soon, another joyful event happened. Olivia realized she was expecting a baby, just like that, without any IVF, without taking any pills. She had long stopped undergoing treatment, letting go of the situation. After all, the doctors had warned her that it could happen like this, that as soon as she relaxed and forgot about the problem, the miracle would happen. In due time, a lovely girl with huge blue eyes and chestnut curls was born. Rafaela was born with long hair. The midwife said it happened sometimes, but rarely. Choosing a name took a while. Ernesto's suggestions didn't appeal to Olivia, and her options didn't satisfy the father. Without realizing it, the young nurse named the girl. It happened by accident. She entered the room while Ernesto and Olivia were discussing the discharge details. She needed to treat the baby's umbilical wound. The little one, as if understanding that an unpleasant procedure awaited her, tried to wriggle out of the nurse's hands. "Look at her. You're only 12 hours old and already so clever. Rafaela." The young parents glanced at each other, smiling. "Rafaela?" Ernesto asked his wife. "Rafaela," she nodded. Rafaela always liked to hear this story. Her parents, telling her, always smiled, and it made her feel warm and happy inside. Needless to say, they didn't refuse Rafaela in anything. She had toys, beautiful dresses, and travels. The mother worked less now. She wanted to take care of her long-awaited daughter herself rather than leave her to nannies. Ernesto also tried to devote attention to their only child. Rafaela received warmth, smiles, and hugs. She grew up in an atmosphere of love and acceptance. For her, the world was a bright, warm, and kind place. Yet, the girl had to work hard from an early age. She had to attend English and dance classes and developmental activities. Rafaela always knew that to achieve something, she had to put a lot of effort into it. She also had to do household chores. Olivia didn't want her daughter to grow up without practical skills. Real princesses, the little girl's mother often said, are not whimsical, ephemeral creatures. Real princesses can take care of household chores even better than maids, speak several foreign languages, and understand sciences. They can engage in any conversation. Rafaela listened and nodded seriously. She really wanted to become such a real princess, and for that, she needed to strive and make an effort. The parents were sure that their daughter would follow in their footsteps. Why wouldn't she? They were a family of medical professionals, and Rafaela spent a lot of time at her parents' workplace, at the clinic, where she learned a lot about diseases, tests, and treatment methods, as she had been involved in it all practically since birth. Ernesto dreamed of a strong medical dynasty and envisioned his daughter as a successful neurosurgeon, and in his dreams he went even further. He imagined his future grandson as a cardiologist or maybe a urologist. Well, it would be up to him, to this brilliant young man. But the girl always excelled in her studies, and in the subjects relevant to medical school, she always received top marks in biology, chemistry, and anatomy. Yet Rafaela envisioned her future differently from a young age. In middle school, she decided she would become a journalist. A journalist? At first, the parents hoped that their daughter would come to her senses and mature. The path to medicine was familiar, paved, and defined. But journalism? Where would she work, and as what? How would she break through? To Olivia and Ernesto, journalism seemed like an unreliable business. They talked to their daughter about it and suggested taking preparatory courses for medical school. She even agreed, but after several lessons, she told her mother and father that she didn't want to, she couldn't do it, and it wasn't for her. The parents backed off, accepted their almost adult daughter's decision, and even supported it. They hired tutors for the subjects Rafaela needed to do well and to pass exams and get into the best university, preferably in the capital city. As graduates from the journalism department, there had more prospects. Ernesto even arranged with an acquaintance from the local TV station to shoot a few stories with Rafaela. She needed it for a creative contest. The journalism department only accepted people with a certain amount of experience in journalism. Rafaela passed the exams with flying colors and got into the prestigious university she wanted, which was located in the capital city. She was ecstatic. The girl spent the entire summer after her graduation exams anticipating the new, wonderful life ahead. Her parents rented an apartment for Rafaela near the university so she wouldn't have to commute by bus or subway every day and spend several hours on the road. The accommodation wasn't cheap. But what wouldn't they do for their beloved daughter? Moreover, the family had the money for it. The girl was absorbed in studies. They captivated and enchanted her. This was exactly what she had always dreamed of: exciting lectures, captivating practical work in the media, vibrant professors who were nothing like the bald old men in glasses and chalk-stained jackets from the physics department. It was impossible not to fall in love with these people. Each of them spoke about their subject in a way that took your breath away. Of course, there was some rote memorization involved, history or philosophy, for example, but Rafaela never complained about the workload. The other impressions from her studies outweighed the unpleasant moments. How nice it was to be among like-minded people at last. Rafaela finally felt understood. Many students had been working for a long time, some in print publications, some on TV. Some of them personally knew people who appeared on screens every day, showbiz stars and famous TV presenters. Rafaela studied, socialized, attended parties, met new people, and felt in her element. She was glad that she had found the strength not to follow in her parents' footsteps, as logical and expected as that would have been, but to choose her own path. Rafaela gladly tried herself as a journalist. The course of study involved a lot of practical work. Rafaela was published in numerous journals with which her university had contracts, filmed videos, conducted life interviews, and interacted with famous people who had achieved a lot in life. There was much to learn from them, and Rafaela did learn. Of course, not all the people Rafaela had to deal with had pleasant, easygoing personalities. There were divas who showed off their superiority in every way, outright rude individuals, and just plain stupid people. But overall, the girl remained enthusiastic about her interviewees. One day, as one of the most responsible and hardworking students, Rafaela was given an incredible assignment. She had to attend a concert of the famous rock band Black Eagles and even interview the musicians. The unexpected happiness almost made her dizzy. In her practice, the musicians of this band were the most illustrious interviewees, true stars. "Go ahead and act in your style," her supervisor, Federico Castro, who resembled a kind old man, instructed her. "Keep your composure, be emotionally stable, you know how to do all this, and coordinate the list of questions with me. By tomorrow evening, I think you'll manage the interview plan. They'll give you an ID card that will easily get you backstage. The musicians will be in the conference hall. They are informed about your visit. There will be people from other publications there. Your presence is approved, so be more confident." And the long-awaited day arrived. Rafaela was at the venue long before the appointed time. There was still plenty of time before the concert, but devoted fans were already crowding the stairs leading to the concert hall doors. Rafaela knew she would be let in through another entrance from the backyard. Unlike all these people, she would soon see the musicians in person and even talk to them. Her heart was pounding with excitement. She just hoped not to mess up this interview. The article had to be simply stunning. Her material would be published on the news website tomorrow, and for social media, she needed a concise post with lots of photos as soon as possible. Rafaela took a photo of the porch from afar with the waiting fans. Instead of the photo's title, she indicated the time, 4 hours before the concert. There's already a crowd here. What's next? Rafaela took a few more atmospheric photos. In her opinion, they captured the pervasive atmosphere very well. She looked around. Where should she go now? She had an ID card that would get her into the conference hall. But who should she show it to? A short, round fellow with a badge that read administrator appeared out of nowhere. "Are you press?" he clarified. She wondered how he guessed it. "He has a talent, no doubt." Rafaela nodded. "Then I'll escort you." The press conference was held in a spacious hall specially designed for such meetings. It was already full of journalists. Rafaela knew some of them. The interviewees were supposed to sit in front of the rows of chairs on a small stage behind a long table. Their seats were still empty, but everything was already prepared for the musicians' arrival. The chairs were close to the table, and there was a bottle of water on each seat. A little more time passed, and the hall filled up with representatives of the media. The administrator rolled onto the stage and announced that everything would start now. Rafaela's breath caught with nerves. It suddenly became unusually cold in her stomach, and she had goosebumps run down her spine. This was her finest hour. The musicians emerged from a side room. Everyone applauded them and took photos. Rafaela also took a few photos. And it began. Correspondents raised their hands, introduced themselves, and asked questions. The musicians answered, sometimes joked, and sometimes were extremely serious and incredibly candid. These rock stars were easy and simple, without any pomp or pretentiousness. Such a way of communicating was inviting and gave confidence and courage. Rafaela asked all her questions, the same ones that had been coordinated with her supervisor, and received detailed and thorough answers to each of them. It was an incredible feeling. She was interacting with people whom she had seen countless times on the screen before. They were stars, real stars, gathering packed audience, their posters decorating thousands of rooms across the country, their songs playing on the radio and television, and echoing from the headphones of young and not so young people on the streets. And they, these demigods, were looking at Rafaela as an equal, waiting for her to finish her question, and then responding to her. At this conference, the girl suddenly realized that she would never be the same again. Something inside her flipped, and she felt like she was capable of anything and could achieve everything she wanted. It seemed like the musicians had infected her with their confidence and strength. Well, guys, thanks for the interesting conversation, the leader of the group and the oldest member finally summed up. It was great to chat with smart people, but the audience is already waiting for us, so excuse us, it's time for us to get ready. The hall was once again deafened by applause. Underneath it, with smiles on their faces, the musicians left the room and disappeared through the same door they entered. And then there was the concert. Of course, all the press representatives were invited to it. Rafaela took photos of the performers. Now they seemed familiar to her, almost like close friends. The musicians were dealing incredibly well with the audience of thousands of people. People were singing along with their idols and dancing. Rafaela looked at the faces of the spectators and understood that they were enjoying the music just as much as she was. Of course, Rafaela photographed the devoted fans. There were so many sincere emotions on their faces. Later, she would show these people their photos and obtain their consent for publication. That was the procedure. Most fans were happy to be featured in a post about their favorite band. The performance of the Black Eagles lasted almost an hour and a half. Afterward, Rafaela literally crawled out onto the porch, exhausted, drained like a lemon, but incredibly happy. She sat on the stone steps, waiting for a taxi. People flowed past her like a gentle river, crowds of devoted fans reluctantly leaving the concert hall, happy and in high spirits. Some continued to hum the songs of their favorite band, some lively discussed the past concert, and many laughed. The same extraordinary atmosphere that Rafaela had felt upon arriving was still present. And then Mariano approached her. Of course, back then, Rafaela couldn't know his name. He just sat down next to her. Rafaela looked at him without much surprise. That day, it was normal, completely unfamiliar people, united by their love for rock music, were treating each other like old friends. "Hey, are you upset about something or just tired?" Rafaela nodded with a smile. "Do you like the Black Eagles?" The girl nodded again. Up to this point, she hadn't been overly enthusiastic about their music. She listened to it occasionally and liked both the lyrics and the rhythm, but after this evening, Rafaela would become a true fan of the Black Eagles. "I have a CD with an autograph. I managed to get through to them, so they signed several for me. Here, take it." And the young man handed Rafaela a square flat box, on the back of which, indeed, was the signature of the leader of the Black Eagles, made with a black marker. Rafaela looked carefully into the guy's eyes and realized that he was really handsome, like an actor from a youth series, chiseled cheekbones, perfect facial features, dark, intelligent eyes, thick chestnut hair, and dressed impeccably, stylishly, and with taste. He seemed a pleasant young man, and kind too. He was ready to give her a CD with an autograph. Seeing the girl sitting on the steps, he probably decided that she was upset about something, so he wanted to cheer up the stranger. Suddenly, she also wanted to do something nice for him. "Thank you, I already have one like this," she smiled. Indeed, after the press conference, the administrator distributed a bunch of items with the musicians' autographs to all the correspondents who wanted them. Rafaela now had not only CDs in her backpack, but also t-shirts, badges, calendars, and posters. "It's a pity, I wanted to please a beautiful stranger." Rafaela's heart joyfully skipped a beat at the word beautiful. Did he really think she was beautiful? Was that a compliment or just a phrase? "Here, take this," the girl said, handing the interlocutor a set of badges. Each of them bore the signature of one of the band members. The guy's eyes lit up with surprise. "Are you serious? Where did you get these?" "I study at the journalism faculty. I interviewed the Black Eagles before the concert. And then they just gave us all this stuff for free." "The journalism faculty? Cool." The young man's eyes sparkled with genuine interest and, it seemed, joy. It was a joy that they finally had a suitable topic for conversation. Now they could have talked normally instead of scattering in different directions. It was a great reason to chat. Rafaela could talk endlessly and enthusiastically about her studies, especially when someone listened to her so attentively. Your face even changes when you talk about all this, the young man noticed. I wish I could love my job like that. What do you do? I have my own business, the guy replied evasively. By the way, I still don't know your name. Mine is Mariano. And what's yours, beautiful stranger? Rafaela, the girl introduced herself and smiled. Again, he called her beautiful. It was so nice. What a wonderful name, and it suits you incredibly well. You look like a fairy tale princess. When I was a kid, that's roughly how I imagined them. Rafaela laughed. That's how you imagined them? In jeans, sneakers, and a Black Eagles t-shirt? Right. Mariano was looking enchanted at Rafaela. It was both pleasant and awkward under his gaze. With the same big eyes and just as beautiful. Rafaela smiled shyly. No one had ever given her such amazing compliments before. The boys from her university group showed their affections in a completely different way. Maybe they hadn't grown up enough for romantic words and deeds yet, while Mariano was older, more experienced, and wiser, and no one had ever drawn Rafaela in like he was doing now. Suddenly, the girl felt scared. What if Mariano just stood up and left? They chatted for a bit, exchanged pleasantries, and that was it. But Mariano didn't disappoint her. Rafaela, how do you feel about continuing this magical evening? I'd like to take a walk. The weather's nice, and I don't feel like going home. How about you? The girl eagerly nodded. They walked hand in hand through the dark streets, night parks, and squares, past fountains turned off until morning. Everything around seemed familiar yet completely foreign. Rafaela had never been in these places at such a late hour before. Passers-by were rare. There were groups of young people or couples in love. Rafaela and Mariano talked, got to know each other, shared details of their lives, and both were extremely candid. Rafaela learned that Mariano was the son of wealthy parents. His father had a big business, a chain of restaurants all over the capital. Rafaela wasn't poor either. Her parents owned a medical center in their hometown, but Mariano was on a completely different level. After learning this, the girl felt a little embarrassed. The young man noticed her embarrassment and said, "You know, it always happens. Every time new acquaintances find out about my parents, they immediately become reserved and start treating me like some kind of demigod, but I'm just like everyone else, nothing special. It's not me, it's my father, who built the business from scratch. Yes, I'm involved in the business. As soon as I got my diploma last year, I became the owner of several restaurants. I'm learning under my father's guidance, and I'm slowly getting the hang of it, but I'm no different from anyone else. Understand?" Rafaela nodded uncertainly. Of course, Mariano was different, but his simple way of communicating and sincerity were endearing. It always happens, the young man continued sorrowfully. When girls find out about my father, they either start seeing me as a goal, a way to get into a comfortable, well-off life, and believe me, it's easy to notice, or they behave like you, they feel awkward, but there are far fewer of those. Usually, girls are happy and start trying to flatter and charm me. I notice it, and it's not unpleasant. I wish my father's status and money were perceived separately from me, but it doesn't work out that way. He was so sincere. Rafaela didn't even know what to say to Mariano. But his speech impressed her, and she suddenly saw in him a good person, a guy dreaming of genuine feelings. It seemed to me that you were different from everyone else, Mariano said quietly. You're unique. I thought all this stuff didn't matter to you. Rafaela clearly realized that she never wanted to disappoint Mariano. His status made her a little uneasy, but primarily, there, on the steps, Rafaela saw in him a handsome young man, kind and attentive. Rafaela was drawn to Mariano precisely because of his personal qualities. I think I can just not think about it, Rafaela smiled. I really liked you before I knew who your father was. The confession slipped easily and simply from her lips. It sounded so sincere that Mariano literally blossomed before her eyes, his face lit up with a charming smile. He gently embraced Rafaela and kissed her. The girl happily responded to the kiss. From that moment on, all doubts disappeared and the awkwardness dissolved. Mariano looked at his companion with admiration and gratitude. Rafaela felt that just her presence made him happy. On their first date, they went bowling, and on the second, to the cinema. After the movie, they skated on the large plastic rink in the same shopping center. It turned out that Mariano felt as natural and easy on skates as if he had been born into them. I played hockey from the age of 4 until high school, he explained to the amazed Rafaela. The girl was also a decent skater, but she was far from Mariano's level. After that second date, they became inseparable. Mariano persuaded Rafaela to move in with him. He had a spacious, stylish apartment in the city center with a magnificent view of the city. At first, Rafaela could spend hours sitting by the window, watching the life of the metropolis. Especially enchanting were the views at night. The city bloomed with thousands of lights. It was a magical sight, as if it were New Year's Eve all year round. Their lives together resembled a fairy tale, short trips to warm places by the gentle sea. As they didn't have time for long trips, Mariano and Rafaela's schedules rarely aligned. Trips to interesting places in the region, picnics in forests and on hillsides, dinners in restaurants and cafes, meetings with friends, nightclubs. Rafaela's life had never been so bright and fulfilling. She felt like they were one with Mariano. The girl felt happy and loved. Perhaps that's why she tried to ignore the warning signs for as long as possible. They were, of course, there, just as lovers tend to idealize their significant other. It was so scary to make a mistake, so scary to suddenly realize that your long-awaited and immense happiness was just a fantasy, a desired illusion. Mariano was wonderful, witty, attentive, knowledgeable, sensitive, and caring, but only as long as Rafaela's opinion coincided with his views on the world. At the slightest disagreement, the handsome young man's beautiful face would disdainfully twist, displeasure would appear in his eyes, and a conflict would ignite, which Rafaela, being more flexible, would immediately extinguish. Anything could trigger it, any triviality, the wrong color shirt for a particular event, disagreements about the political agenda, movie choices, opinions about someone from their common acquaintances. Sometimes Rafaela suddenly realized that she had taken the wrong step, and Mariano was already ready for a furious argument. At first, Rafaela made mistakes, and the conflict still ensued. Mariano was uncompromising. He didn't even attempt to understand his opponent. His opinion was paramount, the only correct and decisive one. The young man would resort to shouting, even to insults. He seemed unrecognizable to himself in those moments. Later, of course, he would apologize, but still, Mariano emphasized this, considering himself right and asking for forgiveness only for his lack of restraint. Eventually, Rafaela learned to prevent these foolish clashes. She attributed Mariano's volatility and inflexibility to his line of work. Mariano was so young, yet already immersed in the world of big business, having to resolve a million issues. It was, of course, stressful. And, naturally, Mariano often had to be tough with competitors and subordinates, with representatives of banks and partners. Otherwise, no one could earn a lot of money. It's quite understandable that Mariano would extend his communication style to his loved ones because it was difficult to switch gears. Rafaela tried to focus on Mariano's positive qualities. And there were many. He was interesting, cheerful, and caring. He never boasted about his wealth and status. Mariano was always supportive. He didn't consider Rafaela's journalism pursuits serious. It was a bit hurtful, but at the same time, he introduced her to influential people in the media world, helped her secure interviews with busy individuals in general, and actively contributed to her professional development. Mariano complimented his girlfriend, often, almost constantly, gave her gifts, and looked at Rafaela as if she were the most beautiful in the world. For him, she seemed to be just that. Rafaela sometimes puzzled over what he found in her. Appearance? Rafaela knew very well that she looked good. She was tall, long-legged, slim, with big blue eyes, thick, shiny hair of a beautiful chestnut shade, and a proper complexion and figure, but nothing truly outstanding. Nothing that distinguished her from the crowd of other girls. And there were plenty of flaws, freckles on her nose, for example, or a scar from a dog bite in a prominent place just above her elbow. And people like Mariano, handsome, wealthy, successful, usually dated flawless beings, fashion models, and girls of an entirely different caliber. Rafaela even directly asked her beloved why he chose her. Sometimes she felt as if Mariano had deceived her, although she herself understood why it was happening. Mariano always answered with different words, but the essence was the same. Rafaela was special, smarter, and more interesting than all those he had dealt with before her. Those others seemed to him to be empty, limited dolls. Rafaela didn't like the way her boyfriend spoke about his exes, but at the same time, it pleased her. Her beloved held a low opinion of those he had dated before her. And she was special to him. It couldn't help but make her happy. Both young people led vibrant and fulfilling lives. Rafaela attended seminars and lectures, practiced, and went on study trips, while Mariano worked, attended business meetings, and went on business trips. They lived in the same apartment and managed to miss each other because they hardly had time to be together. It even happened that Rafaela would return from another student tour to an empty apartment because, an hour and a half before her arrival, Mariano would head to the airport to fly somewhere else in the country to sign another contract. That's how they lived. The graduation was approaching. Rafaela and Mariano had been together for a year and a half by then, and sometimes the topic of marriage came up. Mariano spoke about their future marriage as if it were a given. There was no romantic proposal. He didn't get down on his knee and didn't give her a ring in a red velvet box, but Rafaela knew it. They would get married as soon as she finished university. She was a little worried that even after the wedding, they would have little time for each other, and that wasn't conducive to a healthy family life. Rafaela understood this perfectly, especially when they would have children. It would require attention from both parents. It turned out that Mariano and Rafaela had completely different plans regarding children. "You'll finish your university in the spring, get your diploma," Mariano reasoned, "and then the wedding. I think we'll have the celebration by the end of summer. We can plan for children earlier. It doesn't always happen right away for everyone." As usual, Mariano decided everything for both of them. Sometimes it was pleasant, feeling behind him like behind a rock, trusting him with the responsibility for both of them. But now Rafaela realized that she must express her opinion. She might remain silent on some issues, but this one was too important, and Mariano had touched upon it too significantly. "I actually thought we might wait a little with children," Rafaela said. As the girl suspected, Mariano's handsome face briefly contorted into a grimace. It was a mixture of disdain and disgust. "What do you mean, wait? Why? As a businessman, my status is important. Being a family man, especially with children, opens up many more opportunities. It's the image of a reliable partner that makes collaboration easier." So that's what it was about. That's why Mariano started talking about children. It was somehow offensive. "You see, Mariano, I need to start my career. At least get it started before going on maternity leave. I would like to establish myself as a journalist and make a name for myself, otherwise, it will be difficult later." "You won't need to do anything later," Mariano said, approaching Rafaela and taking her hands in his. "Darling, you won't have to work. You'll stay home and take care of the children. Relax. Maybe you'll find a hobby you enjoy. You see, I already provide well for us." Rafaela realized that if she started arguing now, Mariano would get angry again and say a bunch of hurtful things. Of course, he would apologize, but the resentment would linger. Mariano couldn't stand objections. He wasn't willing to compromise on someone else's opinion. And it seemed Mariano had already made up his mind about everything, seeing no other future scenario. But this wasn't the kind of issue that could just be brushed aside. Here, everything needed to be clarified quickly because they were talking about their joint future. Couldn't they come to an agreement? Mariano, I'm not against having children, but you see, I didn't come here just for nothing. This is my dream to become a journalist, and I love what I do, just like you love your work. But you're a woman, Mariano interrupted. Your destiny is children, family, and husband. I don't understand at all. The wives and girlfriends of my friends dream of such a proposal, to do nothing and live happily on their husband's money. You won't know what it means to be refused anything. Mariano, you yourself said that I'm special, Rafaela reminded him. I did, and it's true, that's why I love you. But sometimes you talk utter nonsense, like right now. It was already offensive, but Rafaela understood. Mariano was getting worked up. She needed to soften him somehow. However, the girl couldn't find a compromise. Saying something that would calm her beloved down meant agreeing with him and accepting his will, but Rafaela couldn't do it. She didn't want to give up her career, and she couldn't see herself as a homemaker. No, it wasn't for her, and Mariano had to know about the plans of the one he wanted to make his life partner. They argued then. It was a rather ugly scene. Mariano yelled, his smart, dark eyes bulging. At that moment, those very eyes certainly didn't seem smart, and Mariano himself looked like an enraged bull, terrifying, contorted with rage, and pitiful. Unjust accusations rained down on Rafaela. Mariano was convinced that in the journalistic community, everyone sleeps with each other, with those they interview and those they feature in their stories. And Mariano also thought that it was disrespect towards him, a challenge to his ability to provide for the family, an attempt to show him as insignificant, and an attempt to compete with him in the matter of making a living. Rafaela listened and marveled. He had truly interesting thoughts in his seemingly intelligent and bright head. Did he love her? In moments like these, when Mariano, a balanced and reasonable person, turned into this screaming and spitting creature, Rafaela doubted it. As usual, reconciliation followed the argument. Mariano said the right words. I'll try to understand you, I promise. Rafaela smiled. She understood how much this promise cost Mariano. After all, he never bent towards others, always pressed on, went to the end, and here. Perhaps he really loves her. But you also need to put yourself in my shoes. We have to find some compromise. Maybe working part-time? Rafaela struggled to object. Like no one else, she understood, the work of a journalist is not just a 9-to-5 job in the office, it's non-stop work, 24/7, and for those who want to achieve more, Rafaela included herself in this category. They needed to work even harder. No children, no housekeeping, not even part-time. But for Mariano's sake, she held back. He himself decided to reconcile, and he even showed that he was ready to compromise on something. Perhaps he would understand and realize it a little later. Rafaela would prepare him for this gently, unobtrusively. After all, they loved each other. That was obvious, and it mattered most. Their love, of course, would overcome all obstacles. And indeed, Mariano became much more lenient towards Rafaela's work affairs and her plans for the future. Later on, Rafaela realized that he didn't accept her but was simply indifferent. He no longer talked about the wedding, even though August, the month when the event was scheduled, was approaching. Overall, Mariano's attitude towards Rafaela inexplicably changed. He was no longer involved in her life and didn't care for her or pay attention. He perceived Rafaela as something taken for granted and ordinary. His compliments and admiring looks disappeared, and gifts and surprises remained, but only on holidays. Mariano no longer sought to go somewhere with Rafaela for a couple of days, somewhere where they wouldn't be disturbed and where they could be alone, yet such trips were simply essential to him before. He called them recharging. Rafaela began to suspect that something was wrong. Mariano clearly cooled towards her. The girl searched for reasons within herself, started going to the gym, and became a regular visitor to the cosmetologist. Rafaela tried to change her appearance and behavior. She would transform into a shattered damsel one day and play the devoted homemaker the next. She wanted to surprise Mariano to pique his interest, but the young man remained indifferent and aloof. He was drifting away, and it scared Rafaela. After all, she still loved him, despite their occasional disagreements. Rafaela tried to talk directly with her beloved. Previously, they were honest with each other, well, almost. Rafaela, of course, sometimes had to pretend to share Mariano's views, even if she didn't, but these were just little things. It's all right, Mariano shrugged. Why would you think something's wrong? I just have a lot of work right now. You know, I'm developing a new project, it's nerve-wracking, and there's a lot of hassle. All my thoughts are focused on it. Once it's finished, we'll go somewhere. Rafaela felt somewhat reassured. Mariano indeed planned to open a new chain of food establishments, children's cafes, with a healthy and tasty menu. Working on this project took a lot of time and energy for the young businessman. He often had to leave, sometimes he flew on business trips, other times he stayed in the office until late, so late that he ended up spending the night there. Despite all this busyness, Mariano looked quite happy, and there was a familiar sparkle in his eyes. Rafaela would have wanted to be happy for her beloved, but something was holding her back. It seemed like this new project was coming between them like a wall, dividing them and pushing them apart from each other. Later, it turned out that it wasn't about the project at all. It all started with an evening phone call. Mariano and Rafaela were at home, about to watch a new movie, and waiting for a courier from the restaurant. And then someone called him. Mariano immediately brightened up, took the phone, and disappeared into the kitchen, even closing the door behind him so Rafaela wouldn't overhear the conversation. Of course, after all that, the girl couldn't stay in the bedroom. She went to the living room, which was next to the kitchen, where she could hear every word Mariano said. Yes, of course, I missed you too. Don't worry, for waiting, you'll get a reward. Yes, it's a surprise. I know what you want. No, not because you're so predictable, I'm just insightful. Rafaela froze. This monologue by Mariano was definitely not intended for a colleague or a business partner. The meaning, the words, the tone, it all resembled communication with a girlfriend. Don't worry, everything will be fine. I miss you too, Mariano murmured to his invisible interlocutor for a couple more minutes before ending the call. When he entered the living room, Rafaela pretended to be looking for a notebook. It took her immense effort to maintain a composed expression. After all, she didn't know anything for sure, so there was no point in showering Mariano with reproaches and suspicions now. She didn't want to appear as a jealous nag in front of him in a foolish situation. Rafaela decided that she would just be more observant from this moment on. And she was. Now the girl noticed many things that she hadn't paid attention to before. Mariano was constantly texting someone, trying to do it in a way that Rafaela wouldn't see. There was a smile playing on his lips, and his gaze was dreamy and pleasant. Most of Mariano's business trips fell on weekends. Rafaela hadn't paid attention to it before. Mariano's schedule was irregular, unlike everyone else's, but there were too many coincidences. And Mariano returned from his trips too happy and dreamy, sometimes even tanned and refreshed. He almost didn't pay attention to her. He no longer needed her hugs, her encouraging words. At the same time, Mariano didn't resume talks about the wedding or plans for it immediately afterward. He still believed that a woman's place was at home. Rafaela no longer argued, it hurt her, her beloved was changing before her eyes, and she no longer trusted him. Rafaela felt it, Mariano had someone else. Then why didn't he tell her about it? Why didn't he end their relationship? Why promise a wedding and talk about a shared future? It was all so unclear. Rafaela couldn't torment herself with uncertainty anymore. But asking Mariano directly was too silly. Of course, he would start to deny it and come up with an explanation for his changed behavior. Rafaela didn't have confidence and didn't have proof of her correctness. In general, Rafaela did something she would never have done before. She snooped through Mariano's phone while he was sleeping. She wouldn't have done such a thing under other circumstances, but she had to know. It concerned her directly, after all. One night, when Mariano was already asleep, Rafaela slipped out of bed, took his phone, and went to the living room. She knew the password. It was simple and easy to remember. Mariano didn't really hide it, he just set it up for show. Rafaela had seen many times how her beloved entered the sequence of numbers. And there it was, that conversation. It was all true. Mariano had a mistress, a girl named Carolina. Whether this name was real or fictional was unclear. In any case, it suited the dusky beauty with huge black eyes, an impeccable figure, and long, jet black hair. She was such a striking, unusual, and simply incredibly beautiful lady. They had been to many places together and managed to take impressive photos in these wonderful places. There were many selfies. Here, Carolina was hugging Mariano against the backdrop of turquoise water, either the sea or the ocean. And here they were, standing next to a partially ruined castle on a hill. Was it in Germany? It looked like it. Here they were kissing, surrounded by blooming trees. Mariano had a mistress, that was obvious. It was pointless to come up with excuses for him and to look for other explanations for his constant absences now. Rafaela saw everything with her own eyes. It was a blow to her. The girl had suspected something, especially after that overheard conversation, but she still hoped she was wrong. Who knows? He could just flirt with a colleague, it happened. Rafaela even liked it herself when other men paid attention to her. She indulged in flirting, but it was more like friendly communication with acquaintances of the opposite sex. But this. Most importantly, Mariano seemed so reliable to her, not without his flaws, of course, but no one is perfect. He talked about the wedding, and Rafaela had already decided that she had found her destiny, believed she would be happy for many years with Mariano, and didn't see anyone else as her life partner. All their disagreements seemed like nonsense to her, nothing that couldn't be smoothed over. The main thing was love and their sincere, strong feelings. But had he ever loved her? Rafaela thought about all this as she scrolled through one photo after another with this fiery brunette named Carolina. She didn't even want to read the messages, they were so personal that Rafaela felt awkward and even disgusted. She felt nauseated by their affectionate nicknames for each other and by the very personal details of their relationship. Rafaela didn't even notice that morning had already arrived. It was getting light outside, a gray, overcast dawn. And at that moment, Mariano walked into the living room. He probably sensed that Rafaela wasn't there or just got used to waking up early, so even on a rare day off, he couldn't linger in bed longer. Seeing Rafaela holding his phone, Mariano understood everything immediately. He was always quick on the uptake. Rafaela thought Mariano would be flustered, start justifying himself, or at least apologize, but he became angry and simply lost his temper. Since when did you develop a habit of taking other people's things? Mariano's eyes burned with righteous anger. Sometimes the best offense is a good defense, Rafaela murmured thoughtfully. What? I don't poke my nose into your things and your personal life, and you seem to have forgotten that, Mariano snapped. Mariano, how could you? If you need Carolina so much, why not just say it? What's the point of talking about a wedding, about a shared future? What does she have to do with anything? How can she possibly affect these plans? She's just a mistress, a beautiful girl to spend time with, nothing more, Mariano retorted. Why? Because every guy gets tired of monotony sooner or later. Mariano was indignant, as if he were talking about the most ordinary and natural things, and Rafaela didn't understand why he felt he was right. Mariano's further words shed some light on the situation. It turned out that for him, it was normal to have affairs on the side. That was how his father and his father's friends behaved. Mariano watched them from an early age and understood that it was normal, it should have been this way. The wife should have been smart, educated, obedient, beautiful, and attractive precisely because of her noble and refined appearance. The mistress should have been young, bright, light-hearted, and cheerful. She was allowed to have a more flashy appearance, embodying the most popular male fantasies. Mariano believed that whoever earned and provided for the family was the head. That person was entitled to certain weaknesses, like bright affairs and mistresses. Mariano wasn't pretending, he wasn't defending himself, as Rafaela initially thought. He genuinely didn't see anything wrong with his actions. In his understanding, a man shouldn't talk about his extramarital relationships, but he also shouldn't hide them, deny them, or make up explanations because this situation is perfectly normal and natural. Mariano's dissatisfaction was only caused by the fact that Rafaela took his phone without asking, put her nose into his affairs, and showed unacceptable curiosity. If we're going to live together, you need to understand that this is unacceptable. You need to know your place. Live together? Rafaela shook her head. How can you talk about living together after this? But Mariano was still convinced that their wedding was a done deal. He yelled and called for Rafaela to get herself together. She was listening to him, seeing the distorted face of the once beloved person, filled with anger. She heard the noise, but her thoughts were far away. Rafaela suddenly realized why Mariano was with her. She turned out to be the perfect option for him, not a beggar, but not the daughter of very rich and influential parents either, meaning not hungry, but not protected by an almighty father, suitable appearance. A modern beauty, not a fashion model, resembling a beautiful but vulgar girl, but very externally pleasant, educated, able to maintain an interesting conversation. The kind you wouldn't be ashamed to introduce to high society, calm, docile. Yes, docile. Rafaela suddenly smiled. What's up with you? Mariano was surprised. Have you lost your mind? I'm just glad. I am glad that I found out all this before the wedding. Of course, there was no wedding. Rafaela gathered her things and left the same day, returning home to her parents in her hometown. She had completely different plans for the time after graduation, preparing for the wedding, traveling with Mariano, and job hunting, but now she needed rest and a reboot. Home was Rafaela's place of strength, where she was always welcomed and where her loving parents completely accepted their daughter. It was at home that Rafaela warmed up, gained energy for further achievements, and believed in herself again. Of course, it was hard to come to terms with the thought that the person who seemed like the ideal life partner turned out to be like this. Rafaela thought a lot about Mariano and understood. She understood that she herself created this attractive image of him. There were many red flags, almost from the very beginning of their relationship, first tinkling quietly and then ringing out like huge bells. Mariano was always narcissistic. And even in his care for Rafaela, with his gallant deeds and chivalrous behavior, he was just showing off. Mariano himself got a kick out of how attentive and good he was. That was the reflection he saw in Rafaela's eyes, and that's why he liked being around her. But gradually, Mariano's true nature emerged. Rafaela noticed these moments, but preferred to find excuses for them. She didn't want to shatter the fairy tale and part with the dream. It was quite a normal desire for a person who wasn't yet very experienced, barely in their 20s. But, of course, Rafaela couldn't endure the betrayal. Throughout the time Rafaela stayed with her parents, Mariano only called once. Seeing his name on the phone screen, Rafaela froze, her heart pounded furiously, her palms grew sweaty, and shivers ran down her spine. She felt the same excitement as at the beginning of their relationship, when she was head over heels in love with the handsome guy. So, could it be that she still had feelings for him? Rafaela answered the call, not knowing how she would behave with Mariano if he suddenly started apologizing and making vows of loyalty, confessing his love. But Mariano only asked about what to do with the things that Rafaela hadn't managed to take. Should I send them somewhere or just throw them away? Tell me, it's kind of weird to have your stuff in my apartment. We broke up, after all. Judging by the background noise, Mariano had guests, glasses clinked, people talked, laughed, and loud music played. Mariano was having a good time. Perhaps that fiery brunette of extraordinary beauty was there right now. Mariano didn't seem upset about their breakup at all. Well, just throw everything away, Rafaela replied and hung up. She didn't see or hear from Mariano anymore, although sometimes he appeared in her dreams. Strangely enough, in her dreams, the guy appeared as kind, sincere, sensitive, and caring as he was at the beginning of their relationship. Sometimes this made Rafaela's heart ache afterward. These relationships weren't easy for her. Eventually, Rafaela pulled herself together and decided to return to the capital. Her parents, as always, supported her. Ernesto paid for her rental apartment. Olivia helped her pack her suitcases. They hugged and said goodbye, and Rafaela went to conquer the capital again, only this time she already had a diploma. Rafaela firmly decided that it was time to focus on building her career. There shouldn't have been any romances or serious relationships. She needed to concentrate on work, achieve something, become someone, and then everything else would follow. But nothing worked out. Rafaela sent her resume everywhere and went to interviews at the publishing houses. No one needed a young journalist without experience. Freelancers managed quite well with light, irregular orders, but all the employers Rafaela approached had their staff complete. Later, she finally realized that connections were needed everywhere. Rafaela lived on random earnings and didn't want to ask her parents for money. Her father already helped her well and paid for the apartment, so Rafaela spent her earnings only on food. And sometimes it wasn't enough. She had to save up and tighten her belt. One day, Rafaela ran into Estrella, a former classmate, at a cafe. Keys to a foreign car were lying on the table in front of her. Estrella herself looked quite luxurious, well-groomed, and expensively dressed. Rafaela knew that Estrella's parents were not simple people. They were either businessmen or politicians. Even back in university, Estrella stood out. She wore expensive branded clothing and used trendy, quite expensive gadgets. A chauffeur often brought her to classes. Rafaela didn't know if he was their household servant or an employee of the company where Estrella's parents worked. Estrella noticed her acquaintance, was pleased, and invited her to her table. Rafaela had never been particularly close with her, but it was nice to see a familiar person from the past, from their student life, and it was interesting to learn about their classmates, what they were doing, and what fate had in store for them. After the customary exchange of pleasantries, Estrella was the first to ask Rafaela a question. "So, where do you work now?" "Me? Well, nowhere, just occasional freelance orders. I'm looking for a job, but luck isn't on my side." "Really? That's a shame. You were one of the best at university. Where are you working?" "Me? Haven't you seen me? I'm a news anchor on Channel 5, hosting the morning news." Rafaela was astonished. Estrella had never been particularly diligent in her studies, and her grades were mediocre, with plenty of absences. Rafaela even wondered how she managed to advance from one year to the next until she found out about her influential parents. After that, everything fell into place. Rafaela had always thought that Estrella considered a college diploma itself as proof of her education, that she would follow in her parents' footsteps and work for their company, but a news anchor, even on the Fifth Channel, that was the big league for the chosen ones. Estrella was certainly photogenic. The camera loved such girls. But otherwise, her expression was lifeless, her speech sluggish, unnatural, and not particularly articulate. How could she be the news anchor? "My father helped me get the job. The channel director is his acquaintance, whom he once helped a lot," Estrella sighed. "My father always wanted me to become a TV presenter, to appear on screen, and he was proud of me. I hate this job, but I can't argue with my father." For a moment, Rafaela even felt sorry for Estrella. She thought about her own parents, who thought their only daughter would become a doctor, but they accepted her decision to become a journalist and began to respect what they did for her. Then Estrella talked about other mutual acquaintances, the guys and girls they studied with, and it turned out that the best arranged ones were not the most successful students in the course, those who had someone backing them up. "Do you know why Eleonora got a job? Because she sleeps with the magazine's director, that's why. And Esteban got into football review just because his uncle is a big shot there." The conversation with Estrella opened Rafaela's eyes. Suddenly she understood why nothing was working out for her. She didn't have any connections in the capital. Apparently, she would have to start somewhere else. She needed to lower the bar, at least initially. Rafaela started monitoring job vacancies in her hometown, and it turned out that the local TV station was looking for staff. Rafaela faced no competition there, as her hometown's universities lacked a journalism department. In the small town, they trained teachers, engineers, and even doctors, but not media workers, so Rafaela went back home. She was even glad about this necessity. After finishing university, the capital seemed somehow foreign, cold, and unapproachable. Not very good memories were associated with this city, Mariano, unsuccessful job searches. Perhaps, gaining experience and strength, Rafaela would return here someday, because, indeed, this was where journalists have the most promising opportunities. This fact couldn't be denied. But right now, she needed to go home. Everything was clear there, everything was familiar. Rafaela was very tired, disappointed, and crushed. It was time to return. Rafaela returned to her hometown. She was welcomed at the TV station with open arms. It didn't surprise her. She got a diploma at the capital and had such rich experience. Rafaela enjoyed her job. She helped the editors plan TV programs and even hosted one herself, conducting interviews with children from the city who had excelled in something beyond its borders. These were simply remarkable kids, a boy who played chess at an adult level at the age of 5 and had already become a European champion, a girl who had conquered the world with her clear, ringing voice. A brilliant 15-year-old footballer who was called up to the national team, a virtuoso pianist, a young writer, a boy programmer winning one prestigious competition after another. Rafaela was amazed at how many talented children there were in their city, and she enjoyed talking to these boys and girls, telling their stories. Rafaela understood that these stories had a powerful motivational effect. This was evidenced by the feedback on her programs, in which the host always received various praises, and it felt good. Rafaela felt at home. She was doing a great and very important job, and she was well aware of it. The TV station team accepted her as one of their own, and here Rafaela found real friends. Their group turned out to be quite diverse in age and background, but this did not prevent these people from genuinely sympathizing with each other, being friends, having fun, and enjoying each other's company, and that was the most important thing. On New Year's Eve, Rafaela found herself in a bar with Lorenzo and Adriana, her colleagues. Adriana was a 40-year-old mother of many children, a makeup artist at the TV station, and just a very interesting and kind-hearted woman. Lorenzo was a student intern and an assistant video operator. It seemed like there was nothing that could connect these three, but it did. Almost everyone at the TV station was friends, understanding each other at a glance, even from half a glance. On stage, a guy in ripped jeans played the guitar, and a girl, resembling an angular teenager, performed some kind of jazz or blues composition. Rafaela liked this song. She even started humming along. Lorenzo and Adriana were discussing something animatedly. It seemed they were even arguing, gesturing, and trying to prove their point to each other. They were always like that. Meanwhile, Rafaela was simply relaxing after a tense work week. She liked this bar. There was live music, a pleasant atmosphere, a variety of drinks, excellent cuisine, and reasonable prices, just positives. The girl leaned back in her chair, feeling relaxed, when she suddenly felt that gaze. It seemed to burn into her back. Rafaela turned around and locked eyes with a pair of light blue eyes. A young man with a tanned face was looking at her with a deep gaze. Rafaela was captivated by this contrast, turquoise in the dark. Otherwise, there was nothing remarkable about the guy's appearance, pleasant facial features, average build, but his eyes were enchanting. Realizing that he had been noticed, the stranger became slightly embarrassed, averting his gaze. It was quite cute. Rafaela immediately felt some sympathy for the guy at the table in the corner. A pleasant warmth suddenly spread through her body, and she felt it in every fiber of her being. He liked her, he fell in love with her. This made Rafaela feel even more confident, and she was glad that she dressed so strikingly for work today. She was wearing slim trousers with sharp creases and a form-fitting turtleneck accentuating the graceful lines of her body. Shortly afterward, the young man gathered courage and approached to introduce himself. Adriana and Lorenzo were dancing near the stage at that moment. Rafaela didn't join them. She wanted to stay at the table alone. It was as if she felt that the blue-eyed brunette was waiting for the right moment. And it happened. The guy introduced himself as Fidel. Rafaela also said her name. Like everyone else, the young man was slightly surprised. Well, indeed, her name was not too common, or rather, nowadays girls were often called that, but there weren't too many adults named Rafaela. Fidel complimented Rafaela, making her head spin. He didn't have Mariano's charm, wasn't as confident, and was much more modest, but also more sincere. That's what won her over. Warmth and acceptance radiated from Fidel. Rafaela was just basking in it. She wanted the moment to last forever, for Fidel to always be sitting next to her like this, talking about something or asking questions that she would gladly answer. They got to know each other, and the longer they talked, the faster mutual sympathy grew. Adriana and Lorenzo returned to the table, exchanging meaningful glances. "Lorenzo, can you give me a lift?" Adriana asked her young colleague. "Of course," he responded eagerly. "As for me, I'll stay here a bit longer," Rafaela told them. Fidel's eyes sparkled with joy at these words. "Sure," Adriana nodded, "just don't forget to call me when you get home." And they disappeared, leaving Fidel and Rafaela alone. Rafaela was very grateful to them for this. That evening, Fidel walked Rafaela home, and the pre-New Year weather allowed it. It was warm enough, and snowflakes were falling heavily from the sky. Fidel was somehow so familiar. Rafaela immediately trusted him, despite her recent disappointment with Mariano. Fidel was completely different from Mariano, less gallant, less ostentatiously attentive. Fidel didn't speak much, he acted. He wrapped his scarf around Rafaela's neck when he thought she was cold, and at the right moments, he offered her his hand to help her over the snowdrifts. They started dating. Now Rafaela knew everything about Fidel. He grew up in a poor family, not just poor, but destitute. His mother raised 3 children alone, Fidel, the eldest, and twins, a boy and a girl, who were much younger than the first son. Fidel's father died at the construction site when the twins were not even born yet. Moreover, no one even suspected that there would be 2 children at once. The mother of Fidel had just found out about her pregnancy when this tragedy happened. It wasn't easy for the mother of many children. She worked a lot, and Fidel mostly took care of the little ones. Fidel was always a good student. After school, he easily got into the local college, but he couldn't finish his studies. It was a tough time, and the family needed money, so he had to quit college. Fidel got a job as an installer of plastic windows. He was handy and quick-witted, so he quickly got the hang of everything. The pay was decent, the family no longer went hungry, and the younger ones went to school in normal clothes, although they didn't indulge in luxury and tried to save on everything. Rafaela admired Fidel. He took on such a responsibility while still a teenager. And now, the young man supported the whole family. Not every son would do that. This act was worthy of respect. Fidel couldn't have acted any differently. He was reliable, kind, and good. Rafaela introduced Fidel to her parents. At first, the young man was afraid of this meeting. They're wealthy and successful. And who am I? A failure. I'm not worthy of a girl like you. If you don't understand this, your parents certainly will. What nonsense. Since Fidel learned that Rafaela's parents were wealthy, he often said something similar. The wealth of Fidel didn't matter to Rafaela at all. But it seemed that he felt embarrassed because of the stark inequality, and this always stood between them. Rafaela had no doubt Fidel loved her very much. She herself was crazy about him and therefore wanted to introduce the young man to her loved ones, her parents. Ernesto and Olivia were delighted with their daughter's boyfriend. He seemed to them to be a prudent, respectful, modest young man, a hard worker, a rare find, and smart. Fidel won the chess championship, and it won over Ernesto's heart. They've been talking. Fidel even seemed to relax, which couldn't but please his girlfriend. It was evident that he enjoyed talking with Rafaela's parents, and for a while, the inequality seemed to be pushed aside. But Fidel still worried. Rafaela was the daughter of wealthy and successful doctor businessmen, and he was the son of a cleaner, an undereducated engineer, and a simple worker who also gave most of his salary to his mother and siblings. Otherwise, they simply wouldn't survive. Rafaela didn't know how to overcome this obstacle or how to show Fidel that all this didn't matter. Fidel began to visit Rafaela's parents frequently. The four of them became closer, their evenings were cozy and pleasant, and the chess game on Sundays between Fidel and Ernesto turned into a ritual. Fidel always won. Time went on, and Fidel was looking for a better-paying job. He often said that he needed to match Rafaela's status. She convinced him that these were prejudices and that she was happy with Fidel as he was, but it did not convince the young man. He felt he was not enough for her. Rafaela even understood him a little. She herself felt something similar when she was with Mariano, this golden boy of incredibly successful and wealthy parents. She understood, but she didn't know how to break down this fabricated barrier. One day, Rafaela's parents directly spoke about the wedding. "What about you two? You're still dating. Do you plan to formalize your relationship?" Ernesto asked Fidel in a semi-joking manner. Rafaela froze. Her father, of course, was tactless, but, on the other hand, he showed Fidel that he didn't mind his daughter marrying a groom who didn't earn enough. And besides, Rafaela was very curious to know what Fidel would say. The guy immediately seemed to darken. "You know, I don't earn much." "So what?" "I don't earn much either," Rafaela interjected. "You know, even less than you, so everything's fine." "That's it," Olivia smiled, "everything's fine." But Rafaela's used to a different life. Fidel decided to be completely honest. "I just won't be able to give her what she deserves. I can't do it, not yet." Rafaela winced as if in intense pain. Did he really not understand anything? Didn't he see that his success wasn't important to her? She cared about something else entirely. "There's nothing to worry about," Ernesto put his hand on Fidel's shoulder, encouraging him. "You don't know our story. When my wife and I got married, we had absolutely nothing. It all came later. With years and experience, we achieved everything together. So I understand perfectly. Don't worry. The main thing is that you're the right, faithful person." This conversation changed a lot. Fidel began to feel more confident. His anxiety about social inequality didn't completely disappear. He still felt awkward about it and continued to look for ways to earn a more decent living, but the guy still dared to propose to Rafaela. They got married and moved into the apartment that Rafaela inherited from her grandmother. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, not in the best neighborhood of the city. But the newlyweds decided to start almost from scratch, just like Rafaela's parents once did. They declined Ernesto's generous gift, a well-appointed, spacious apartment in the center, and he got them right. Rafaela's parents still supported the young family, but secretly, so as not to embarrass their son-in-law, and he tried very hard to achieve something. Rafaela was happy. This was exactly how she imagined a happy family life. Fidel turned out to be a wonderful husband, caring, sincere, and gentle. They didn't have a period of getting used to each other, as everyone warned them about. Everything went smoothly and naturally. Household duties were somehow distributed on their own. Overall, everything seemed fine, but she overheard the conversation. Fidel was clearly not talking to a colleague. It wasn't a business call, as Rafaela initially thought. Fidel was rejoicing about something, and he was talking to a woman. "Yes, of course, you were right. You told me from the beginning, I know." "No, what are you talking about?" "My wife doesn't know yet. She didn't need to know this, but I'll tell her, I promise. I can't believe it all worked out for us. I'm so happy. I've never felt such emotions before." Rafaela felt a wave of icy shivers run down her spine. Her husband, her beloved, kind, and honest Fidel, was confessing his feelings to some woman. How else could this be interpreted? He clearly said that he had never felt such emotions, even with her or his wife, as it turned out. "You're amazing," the man continued. "I never thought everything would go so smoothly for us. It's some kind of miracle." Jealousy, burning jealousy, clenched Rafaela's heart. Her eyes darkened with anger. Her Fidel, her beloved, openly rejoiced that things were going well for someone else on the side, and he sounded so happy. But how could this be? Rafaela believed in him more than in herself. She thought they had pure, strong feelings and a wonderful relationship. Suddenly, the woman remembered that Fidel now often disappeared at work, said they had a lot of orders, and sometimes he appeared after midnight, tired, silent, and somehow drained. And they didn't have more money. Its amount became even less. How did she not notice this strange fact before? How did she not pay attention to it? It seemed Fidel was just like Mariano. And the situation was similar. Fidel's absences, his excuses, the overheard phone conversation, it was like some kind of samsara wheel. Again, Rafaela was deceived, and not only her. Her parents also considered Fidel to be almost perfect. How could he do this to her? Why didn't he just say he fell in love with someone else? And he must have really fallen in love with that other woman. He was so happy with her, smiling, his voice full of happiness. Tears welled up in Rafaela's eyes. She suddenly had a suspicion. Fidel probably just pretended to be uncomfortable with Rafaela's parents' wealth, when in reality he planned to use their money and connections to live comfortably and enjoy affairs on the side. "No, don't deny it," Fidel continued. "This is your achievement. You made me incredibly happy. Everything will be different now. Don't even doubt it. I'll thank you for all this and make you happy too." It was too much already. Fidel hadn't been so friendly and cheerful with her for a long time as he was with his conversation partner. On the contrary, lately, there has been so much anxiety and sadness in his eyes. Rafaela tried to cheer him up, make him happy, and surprise him. And today, on a rare day off, Rafaela came home early from work and ordered food from a restaurant. She wanted to sit with him by candlelight and talk, and then this happened. Rafaela silently slipped into the living room. She didn't want to listen to her enthusiastic husband anymore because that enthusiasm was caused by some other woman, a lover. All men are the same. Fidel was just like Mariano. Tears welled up in her eyes, but Rafaela held them back. She had to confront her husband now. She needed to keep herself together, and then she could cry her heart out later. Fidel chatted with his conversation partner for a few more minutes. They were probably exchanging pleasantries or arranging a meeting. The man entered the living room and was startled to see Rafaela. "Oh, you're already here," he said, as if nothing had happened. His eyes still held the joyful sparkle from the conversation with his lover. "I got off work early," Rafaela replied. "That's great." Fidel seemed not to notice that his wife was barely holding back tears. Of course, he himself was happy. In such a state, people often don't see others suffering. "It's great that you're home because I have some news for you." Rafaela tensed up. Was he planning to tell her about the divorce right now? It wouldn't work out. She would leave him first. How painful and scary it was to have to do this. "I heard everything," Rafaela said, her voice icy. "Did you?" Fidel was taken aback. "What exactly?" "My conversation with Paulina?" "So, you're aware of everything?" Rafaela nodded grimly. But Fidel, on the contrary, beamed. "Well, I wanted it to be a surprise," he said. "It'd be a bad one," Rafaela said grimly. Her voice trembled. Emotions were getting the better of her. "Wait. What's going on?" Fidel finally noticed something was amiss. Oddly, he seemed surprised. But what was there to be surprised about? Did he think she should have jumped for joy at the news of his mistress? "Explain to me when this mistress of yours appeared, Paulina," you said. "Paulina?" Fidel asked, then smiled broadly. "Rafaela, what are you talking about? Paulina's not a mistress. She's my former classmate, and even before that, We went to kindergarten together as childhood friends. She works at a bank in the business lending department, and thanks to her connections, I got a large loan at minimal interest rates. What? Rafaela's turned to be surprised, her eyes wide. I didn't want to be a burden on your family, and you shouldn't have to endure sacrifices because of me. I was supposed to ensure us a happy future and a comfortable life. Rafaela nodded. She knew all this perfectly well. She had heard it more than once or twice. So I thought about how many years I've been working as a window installer, working for my uncle, but I have enough experience and knowledge to open my own business. I also have the necessary connections. I know where to find clients. I'm quite familiar with this business, after all. So, Fidel decided to take a risk and start his own business. His classmate helped him get a loan, and work was in full swing, which was why Fidel disappeared for days, looking so tired and worried. It was unclear whether the business would succeed. But the guy put everything, even more than everything, into this business and took out a loan, even at minimal interest rates, but still. I didn't tell you because I thought it might not work out. I wanted to present everything as a fact. And now, the moment has come. We signed a contract with the shopping center, everything is already signed, and work is underway. We've got the first money. So, I called Paulina to share the joy. After all, she helped a lot to get me this loan. If not for her help, no one would have approved such a sum for me, and she helped, so I promised to thank her. And you, it turns out, heard everything and thought Paulina was a mistress. Rafaela nodded silently. Suddenly, she felt a little amused and a little embarrassed, but most importantly, happy that everything worked out and that she didn't have to be disappointed in Fidel, happy for his success. Perhaps now this last barrier between them would disappear, and that would be wonderful. It was happiness. May I invite you to a restaurant? Fidel smiled gallantly and offered Rafaela his hand. The intercom buzzed. No need for a restaurant. The restaurant came to us. Rafaela smiled and went to open the door for the courier. Indeed, they had something to celebrate today.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.